benchmarks. India's GDP is set to grow at its slowest pace in 5 years after the third quarter growth falls to 6.6%. The second quarter GDP growth number is also revised lower to 7%. Jet Airways chairman Naresh Goyal agrees to step down in a bid to try and save the airline from being grounded. But the final recast plan is still in the works as lenders and Etihad fail to agree on terms. Bharti Airtel will raise 32,000 crores via rights issue and perpetual bonds as it looks to deleverage its balance sheet. Indian armed forces show evidence to prove that Pakistan used F-16 aircraft to attack Indian military installations in Jammu and Kashmir, welcomes Pakistan's decision to release Captain Abhinandan. Now, U.S. stocks finished lower on Thursday after a sudden breakdown in Dinako Ryatso in talks with North Korea weighed on sentiment. Even though main indices posted strong gains in February, better than expected fourth quarter gross domestic product data helped to offset some of the selling pressure during the session. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle sums up all the Wall Street action in this report.
Stocks finished lower in Thursday's Wall Street session. Very small declines, but the first three-day decline streak for the S&P 500 of 2019. At the end of the day, the Dow, the S&P 500, the Nasdaq all finished down by about 0.3%. Pretty amazing considering there continues to be a number of macro headlines, geopolitical uncertainties, DC drama. But even so, stock investors not caring too much with those small moves, telling you they're looking for clues about the corporate profit outlook. Now, relative to sector composition for the S&P 500, 8 of the 11 sectors were lower, led by both materials and energy, down about 1% or more. On the upside, the 3 up sectors, defensive sectors, including utilities, consumer staples, and real estate. So a little bit of defensive posturing there. As for the big laggards on the day, really dragging on that S&P 500, HP down 17%, the worst day since 2011, as the outlook disappoints, especially around some of the higher margin printing products. While Booking.com, those shares also plunging down about 11%. This as the earnings view misses the mark. To the upside, though, Monster Beverage up 8.7% on a good quarter and strong outlook, decent outlook that investors like. And then Southwest Airlines up about 4% on unconfirmed speculation of the possibility that Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway might take out the airline. Berkshire Hathaway is the second largest shareholder of Southwest Airlines with a 9.9% stake, but unconfirmed. Even so, investors bidding those shares up. And when we go across asset class, bonds were also lower. So when you put that together with stocks down just slightly, it wasn't a risk-off day, really a neutral appetite, risk appetite. Investors, stock investors, bond investors treading water, waiting for the next catalyst. In New York, Abigail Doolittle, Bloomberg News.
Well, that's as far as the U.S. markets are concerned. But what about our own markets at this point in time? Well, we're looking at the SGX Nifty, which is trending marginally higher at this. And if you can have the SGX Nifty up on your screen, and we can take a look at how things are panning out. There you have it, about 14 points gain. And when it comes to markets, well, yesterday, let's take a look at how the Nifty has done as well. And, well, flattish moves on the Nifty 50, the mid-cap and the small-cap indices advancing by around 0.5%. And when it comes to the Nifty banking futures, or pardon me, just the Nifty banking index at this point in time, well, there you have it, marginal gains for the Nifty PSU banking index. Let's move on and talk about some of your other stocks. And Vedanta, ICICI Bank in the ADRs advancing in trade. So we'll be watching out for that as well. And in terms of other stocks, we have Wipro, Infosys, and HDFC Bank also, well, showing marginal cues. But in terms of your institutional flows, what we're actually looking at this point is FII's inflow standing at around 3,200 crores, a significantly large number. But do remember the gross numbers were also quite big. And the DI is, on the other hand, selling a stake of worth around 5,200 crores. So we'll be watching out for that. Now, in terms of your contributors, we have stocks like TCS, HDFC Bank, and Maruti Suzuki bearing down on the indices. ICICI, Reliance Industries, and Coal India, on the other hand, well, giving some support to these indices. That said, moving on to your futures and options space, and again, we have seen we're entering into new series at this point. March futures standing at around 28% increase in OI, and this number is likely to be large considering we are seeing a lot of rollovers come through. And the Nifty banking futures at 70% increase in OI. Do remember the rollovers have been a tad lower than your previous 3-month average. Currently at around 60% for the Nifty. And in terms of your open interest distribution, where we are looking at substantial increase in the 11,000 call and the 10,700 put, that's the 300-point range that we are working with. And of course, there's more writing around the 10,900 call, given we saw a very, a quiet closing, at least as far as that's concerned. But India VIX came off by around 3.3%. And in terms of your Nifty put call ratio, that is up significantly higher to around 1.7. And the Bank Nifty put call ratio also at around 1.4. So keep an eye on that one. And in terms of stocks, we're keeping an eye on a whole host of likes of NHPC, Canfin Homes and Mahanagar Gas. And of course, these are just some that we're going to keep an eye on. And as we move into trade today, let's go across to Bloomberg's Rosalind Chin, who is joining us live from the Hong Kong studio to give us an update on the Asian markets. Rosalind, good morning.
Good morning. Well, broadly speaking here, we're looking fairly positive, but, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily convincingly so right now. We've got the MSCI Asia Pacific Index up, but only just about less than 0.1%. The Nikkei and the Topics have been making fairly okay gains today. The Nikkei up by 0.75%. Topics actually now only up by about 1/3%. But what we have been watching is China, because we did get news early this morning that the MSCI is going to include the booster weighting, rather, of China listed stocks eventually to 3.3% of the MSCI Emerging Markets Index in November. It's going to do it in 3 stages starting in May. The MSCI says Chinese regulators have proven that they've been very committed at opening up accessibility to foreign investors. So in total, they're aiming for 253 large and 168 mid-cap Chinese shares in the index, including 27 ChiNext stocks. So right now, we've got the Hang Seng making gains of just under 1/5%. The CSI 300 also up by about 1/4%. Shanghai Composite opened higher, but now actually just about flat. We're expecting numbers from the China Caixin PMI due in a few minutes from now. So probably a little bit of sitting on the sides while we wait for that data to come out. Korea, that index is actually losing a fair bit today, down by 1.76% at this moment in time. We did have some fairly miserable export numbers out from them earlier, with exports falling by the most in 2 years in the month of February. The key driver, falling semiconductor prices, and semiconductors account for about 1/4 of South Korea's exports. So it's a really big dent right there. We've got the likes of Samsung Electronics down by 3.5%. That is one of the biggest weighted in company share on the Kospi. And of course, SK Hynix, that's down by more than 5% right now. These markets are actually closed today, but this was how they closed yesterday. So some bad news coming in already before even these numbers were announced. Now we have Japan, the Nikkei. The yen extending declines to its lowest level in more than 2 months. Right now, we have the yen at 111.59 to the US dollar. And of course, we will, of course, be looking ahead to the NCP, the Chinese talks which are coming up next week, and the possibility of, for example, a meeting with Xi Jinping and Trump as those trade talks move on, now that the whole meeting in Hanoi with Kim Jong-un has come to an end. Back to you.
Right, Rosalind, thank you so much for joining us and getting us those updates from Asia. Now let's see what's making the headlines across the globe. We have Ed Ludlow of Bloomberg News bring us the first word headlines.
President Trump won bipartisan praise for walking out of the summit with Kim Jong-un, with Senate leaders on both sides saying no deal on nuclear weapons is better than a bad deal. North Korea disputed US claims that Kim demanded the complete lifting of sanctions and said it offered a realistic proposal.
Although we've come up with a deal that we have never offered in the past, the American government still doesn't want to partially lift the sanctions. It concerns me that our chairman could lose the intention to continue the negotiations with the US. I cannot assure you that this kind of chance will come again for the American government.
The Trump administration has won a key victory over China, with the World Trade Organization ruling that Beijing's farm subsidies breached international commitments. The decision could force China to reduce subsidies, making American farmers more competitive. China says it is considering making an appeal on the ruling. Indian growth slowed in the fourth quarter, with the global slowdown and tighter domestic conditions now worsened by tensions with Pakistan. GDP expanded 6.6% through December from a year earlier, slightly below estimates and down from 7% in the September period. Waning consumer demand hurt an economy where domestic spending accounts for 2/3 of GDP. New Renault chairman Jean-Dominique Senard is said to replace at least 2 members of the board amid a shake-up of governance in the post-Carlos Ghosn era. We're told the wife of former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair won't be returning, and a top independent director will leave in June because of his age. Sources say Senard wants the board to be less of a rubber stamp operation than it was under Ghosn. Global News 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ed Ludlow. This is Bloomberg.
The many revisions in past GDP data means that it's very tough to glean any key takeaways or clear takeaways from the GDP data that we're getting these days. But nevertheless, we'll try and give you a sense of what came through in the second estimates for the full year growth of FY19 and also the Q3 numbers that came through on Thursday. For the full year, we're expecting growth at 7% now. That compares to the earlier estimate of 7.2%. At 7%, it's the slowest growth that we will see in about 5 years in the Indian economy. If you're looking at a quarterly trend, then the expectation is that you'll see quarterly growth rates fall to 6.6% in terms of GDP growth. This compares to 7% revised growth in Q2 and 8% revised growth in Q1. In GVA terms, growth in the Indian economy is expected at 6.3% in the third quarter of FY19. Now, in terms of expectations, this is not too out of line with what was being expected. But one primary reason for the ups and downs that we have seen in growth is that you had seen revisions in the FY18 numbers. And because FY18 numbers had been revised upwards, FY19 numbers in terms of year-on-year growth look a little bit softer. And that is one reason why you're looking at 7% growth for the full year. If you're looking at sectoral trends on a quarterly basis, Q3 agriculture growth is at 2.7%. That's weaker than the 4.2% in Q2. Manufacturing growth is more or less steady. Construction is actually strengthened to 9.6% growth. Mining at 1.3% is also stronger than what you'd seen in Q2, where you had negative growth in the mining sector. There was some attention that was focused on financing because of all of the NBFC troubles that we've seen, but we haven't seen that in the numbers yet. So growth in the financial services real estate sector is flat at about 7.3%. It was 7.2% in Q2, but perhaps those numbers will start to show up in the financing segment with a little bit of a lag. Public administration, which is government spending linked, there, of course, you have seen a slowdown to 7.6%, suggesting that the government's tight finances may have had some impact on that particular segment. The broader story, if you're talking sectorally, is certainly one where agricultural growth has been weak on a nominal basis throughout this year. In fact, in some quarters, you've seen nominal growth below real growth, which is telling you the price effect, the fact that agricultural prices have been deflating, and that's been impacting incomes in the economy, in the rural economy in particular. But if you see manufacturing and you see construction, both between FY18 and FY19 has actually seen strength. And that's something to be, relatively positive about. Construction is stronger because of large government spending on infrastructure, so that's not entirely private sector activity. But crore GVA, which strips out agriculture and government services, has strengthened in terms of the quarterly change, and that's being seen positively by economists. The expenditure side trends tell you that you have seen a sharp slowdown in private consumption between Q2 and Q3, but it is still at a higher level than what you'd seen in Q1. So not clear whether you're seeing a very steep slowdown come in because of one-off factors. Some of it may be because of the NBFC crisis, or whether there is a secular trend of decline in consumption growth rates. That's not entirely clear yet. The investment side held up nicely, but government consumption expenditure was down again, a story story linked to the government spending side. One last takeaway, an important one, which was pointed out by Devendra Pant of India Ratings and Research in his note, is that the size of the economy in FY19 is now at 190 lakh crore, 190 trillion, compared to the earlier estimate of 188 lakh crore. That has a bearing on the fiscal deficit number. Because the size of the economy has gone up, you will see the fiscal deficit target of 3.5% being met slightly more easily than it would have been if we hadn't seen those past revisions to the GDP data. So, those are some of the takeaways. In terms of policy or interest rate takeaways, I don't think the message has changed. Economy is subdued and inflation is under the 4% mark. So it certainly does still leave room for the MPC to cut rates.
So Naresh Goyal, the chairman of Jet Airways Limited, has decided to step down from the board of the company as well as his position as the chairman, and is primarily to facilitate a restructuring plan that has been created by the lenders of Jet Airways. Now, remember that lenders led by State Bank of India had called for a high-level meeting on Wednesday evening where Jet Airways senior management as well as Etihad Airways senior management had met with the lenders to discuss this resolution plan that is on the table. Now, according to the plan, there is a portion of the loans of the company which might be converted into long-term while the remaining loans will be rescheduled in some form or the other. And finally, the lenders will be allotted about 11.4 crore shares, which would make them the largest shareholder in the company. What we understand from our sources is also that the lenders asked both Jet Airways' promoter as well as Etihad Airways to bring in some equity at a later stage in the company because required to stabilize the operations of the company as well as to keep the airline afloat. So once that stage has been reached, then there will be a rights issue where the existing shareholders will be allowed to put in some equity into the company. As well as the rights issue, there is also a proposal for bringing in new. Now, according to some news reports, the National Infrastructure Investment Fund is likely to invest in Jet Airways. However, Bloomberg was not able to independently verify this. But the one thing that has been playing on the conditions that Etihad Airways has put on the restructuring plan, it seems that some of the conditions are very tough for the lenders to accept, and that would the implementation of the plan would depend on not the lenders actually accept Etihad Airways' conditions, and finally the money does come into the airline, and about 10,000 crore of debt is stabilized.
Well, Bharti Airtel will be raising close to 32,000 crore rupees through two different instruments to strengthen the balance sheet. So if you see, of the 32,000 crore rupees, the 25,000 crore rupees will be raised via a rights issue. Now, as it is a rights issue, the promoter will put in close to 16,785 crore rupees, while the remaining 8,215 crore rupees will come in from the public shareholders. Now, the remaining 7,000 crore rupees will be raised by the company by issuing foreign currency denominated perpetual bonds. Now, the terms and conditions of these bonds are yet to be finalized. So what is a perpetual bond? It is a fixed income security with no maturity date, which means that the company will never have to repay the principal amount and will only have to make the periodic interest payments that are linked to these bonds, and the principal amount, that is 7,000 crore rupees, will never have to be repaid by Bharti Airtel. Also, the amount raised by this perpetual bonds will not form a part of Bharti Airtel's total debt. Now, the rights issue, if you see, to subscribe to the rights issue, only those shareholders who own shares of Bharti Airtel as on the record date will be eligible, and these eligible shareholders will be issued 19 new shares for every 67 shares that they are holding in Bharti Airtel, and these shares will be issued at a price of around 220 rupees per share. That is a discount of nearly 31% to yesterday's closing price. So here's a simple math which shows the effective cost price of owning Bharti Airtel shares post the rights issue. So suppose an investor owns nearly 67 shares of Bharti Airtel at rupees 318, that is yesterday's closing price, then he will be eligible for 19 new rights issue shares at around 220 rupees per share. So the effective cost of per share after subscribing to rights issue will be close to 296 rupees. That is a discount of nearly 7% to yesterday's closing price. So the rights issue is attractively priced for investors who want to invest in Bharti Airtel. Lastly, the main point of the debt, that is the debt and the leverage. Now, if we assume that the entire fund raised through this options will be used to repay its debt, then the Bharti Airtel's consolidated debt will be lower by nearly 30.5% to close to 73,000 crore rupees, while its leverage ratio, that is net debt to EBITDA, would come down to around 2.9 times from 4.2 times earlier.
So let's have a look at the important stocks for today. Auto companies to report sales numbers for the month of February from today. Double-digit growth seen in Bajaj Auto, Eicher Motors, Hero MotoCorp and Tata Motors. M&M Tractors may see a degrowth. Then we have sugar companies. Government approves rupees 10,540 crores soft loan to help sugar mills clear cane arrears. Orissa Minerals Development Company to pay rupees 400 crores penalty to Odisha government. Penalty due to violation of environmental clearance and other norms. Market capitalization of the company stands at 493 crores as of February 28th. Then we also have Vivan Housing Finance. CRISIL downgrades credit rating to A1 from A1 plus for short-term borrowings worth rupees 2,525 crores. CRISIL says DHFL has shown limited progress in raising funds in the last 1 month. Vodafone Idea's cabinet approves FDI a proposal of up to rupees 25,000 crores. The approval was required for the proposed rights issue. Lastly, jet fuel prices have risen by 8.1% on an average for the month of March compared to the month of February. This is the biggest hike since January 27th, and the price now is rupees 64,517 rupees per kiloliter.
इलेक्ट्रॉनिक सिग्नेचर होता है हर जहाज का. हमारे पास उस इलेक्ट्रॉनिक सिग्नेचर को मैच करता हुआ हमने उसको पाया, जिसकी वजह से हम ये कह सकते हैं कि F-16 इस मिशन में शामिल थे. तो ये एविडेंस है कि और एक एमराम का जो पीस हमको मिला है यहाँ से वो. तीसरी बात, अगर आप मीडिया रिपोर्ट्स देखें पाकिस्तान की तरफ से भी, तो आप देखेंगे कि कुछ इंजन वगैरह के पीसेस हैं, कुछ एयरक्राफ्ट के कंपोनेंट्स हैं या कुछ ड्रॉप टैंक्स हैं जो वहाँ दिखाए गए हैं, वो MiG-21 के नहीं हैं. और भारतीय वायुसेना का सिर्फ एक जहाज मिसिंग है, वो एक MiG-21. तो इन सब चीज़ों को देखते हुए ये कंक्लूसिवली कहा जा सकता है कि F-16 को यूज़ किया गया.
और बालाकोट के मामले में वहाँ पर जो हमने आतंकी अड्डों को नष्ट किया, उसको कैसे स्थापित करेंगे?
हमारे पास, मैंने जैसा कहा पहले, कि हमारे पास एविडेंस है कि जो हम करना चाहते थे, जो हम टारगेट को जितना डिस्ट्रॉय करना चाहते थे, जो इफेक्ट हमको चाहिए था, वो हमको इफेक्ट मिल गया. अब वो गवर्नमेंट के ऊपर है कि हायर लीडरशिप पे कि किस तरह, कब और कैसे वो एविडेंस देना है या नहीं दिखाना.
There's lots to talk about through the course of the day, and you will find all the live market action on Bloomberg Quint. There are also a few stories that you should consider reading on our website, bloombergquint.com. Here they are. Infosys has said that it's led an independent director, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, inadvertently sold 1,600 shares of the company without obtaining a pre-clearance for trade. As a result, a penalty of 9.5 lakh rupees has been imposed on Mazumdar-Shaw, the company said in an exchange filing. And an 8-member team headed by Deputy Governor Usha Thorat has been constituted to examine issues related to offshore rupee markets and recommend policy measures to ensure stability of the external value of domestic currency. The task force will assess the causes behind the development of the offshore rupee market and study the effects of offshore markets on the rupee exchange rate and market liquidity in domestic markets. And that's a wrap on this edition of All You Need to Know. Stay tuned to Bloomberg Quint for more news and updates.